Hi, this is Kyle McMaster with McMaster Robots, and we're going to be painting up one of these Wally sprockets for the drive system. I've gotten a lot of requests to do the weathering tutorial for this. And so one thing we'll talk about before we get started with the painting is the prep work. So what we did was we hit this entire thing with a light coat of gray primer, Krylon. You could use any primer. And then we went in lightly with some sandpaper and some steel wool. And we just, with this particular one, we actually had these raised edges here. And so to make the B&L logo stand out, we just made sure to hit that with some sandpaper and then some steel wool to smooth it out. And so that's why it looks a little rough here, but that'll look a bit more appropriate here in a minute. Another option here is we do have, depending on which wheel you're painting, you may find you have one here that's recessed like this. In this case, I still hit it with just the gray primer, but then I had to go in afterwards because I couldn't just sand it. I actually went in with a black paint, which I'm just using AK black, but you can use any black acrylic paint or whatever you're comfortable using. And yeah, I just filled that in to make that a little bit more pronounced so that when we go in and weather it, it'll actually stand out. But for now, we'll be working with this guy here. And so to get started, just like with the treads in our last video, we're going to be starting with this warm buff from Apple Barrel. You can use any acrylic paint. This is just a kind of a sandy beige. And so we'll go ahead and put this on our palette. And I'm just going to take this, it's a makeup brush I got from CVS that it's actually become really firm because I've used it quite a bit. I tend to like this for when I have to paint large surface areas or if I have to do some dry brushing. I also have this little detail brush. I think it's like a size 1 or a size 0 in case we need to do any detail work. And so to start, I'm just going to load up this makeup brush here with some of the beige. And we're just going to pat it down just to kind of take a little bit of the excess off. And then once it's loaded up, essentially what we're going to want to do is we're going to use this beige as kind of a map for where we want our rust to build up. And so on this one, I'm thinking maybe we'll have it kind of come across the logo here a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is we're just going to start and be brave here. Just going to pat it right here onto the part. And we're just going to kind of pat out this kind of outline here. And with this, we're actually going to make this quite a bit dirty with a few exposed areas. And so here we might even build it up kind of around the edges here. And then a technique I've been using with these is if I don't want this, if I still want the logo to show up here, I'll just dip my finger in a little bit of water here. And I'll just take my finger and kind of lightly rub. And you'll notice it just takes the paint right off the raised edges here. And it still leaves a little bit of a residue, so it still looks like it's a little dirty, but that way it still stands out. And that way it gives it a kind of a nice weathered look. And so then I'll just keep doing this. I'll kind of go around. I've noticed in a lot of the images I've used as reference, these areas tend to be really dirty. And so we're just going to go in and I'm just going to put kind of a heavy coat of this stuff in here. And to avoid brush marks, I'm also just tapping wherever I really lay into it with the brush so that it gives it a little bit of texture. And then as we get to the edges here, I just like to kind of flare out the paint a little bit so it doesn't look just solid white. We still want a little bit of the gray to show underneath. Then we'll kind of work it out towards the edges here. And we kind of just keep doing this. I may even take these little screw heads here and just lightly brush them a little bit to give them a little bit of a kind of a corroded look. And we may cover a lot of these, we'll end up covering them with brown and eventually some burnt umber. But yeah, anywhere I see an edge here where it looks a little flat, I just sort of pat it out a little bit. And you notice as we go, we're running out of paint on the brush, and that's perfectly fine because it gives us kind of a dry brush technique a little bit. And it allows us to kind of pat on little scratches and things as we go along here. And we'll just keep loading up the brush and keep doing this. And it's completely up to you how you want this to look. So like I'll just kind of keep going here on this side here, and we'll just once again, we'll kind of go in here and just really get into the thing, to the crevices here. A lot of this is actually going to end up being darkened with our darker browns and burnt umber. So don't be too worried. If we miss anything, we can always go back later. But I like to kind of use the white paint here as kind of our roadmap for where all of our rest is going to end up. And on some of these, where if it's like the heaviest, I may even decide that we're going to take this and just bring it all the way up and make it really messy in a couple spots here. So this will actually carry over not only onto the side here, but then a little bit onto the ring. We just really want to dirty it up. Okay, so we'll just keep going here. I think on this one, we'll kind of start in the back here. And then we'll kind of flare it out to kind of match that kind of line there. And then maybe we'll just have it kind of brush up a little bit, and then we'll leave the rest of that kind of open. And then again, maybe we'll just kind of pat on little spackles here and there. I'll just get right down to that crevice. And we kind of rinse, wash, and repeat this technique a little bit. These sides here tend to be the dirtiest in all of the images I've seen of Wall-E, or at least these little bits. And so I tend to put the most paint kind of on these little side areas here where it's accumulated. And then we just sort of speckle it up here, kind of build up the edges. And what's nice is if you speckle it like this, when we eventually put on the brown actually is a little transparent, and the white will show underneath it. So any of these weird patterns we create with the white will actually show through as an extra layer. So in this one, we're actually going to make this pretty heavy, I think, and then kind of have a little bit of a spot right there where maybe it's not as heavy. And it's completely up to you how you want this to look. If you want it to be a little dirtier in some areas and not dirty at all in others, it's completely up to you. It's basically, we're just kind of using this as like our template a little bit, and we're just sort of working our way around. And on this one, maybe it gets a little cleaner, so we may not go as heavy here. Just speckle a little bit with the brush, and we'll kind of build it up from this side. Start with the kind of the back here, kind of work our way forward. Tends to be a little cleaner in the center where you still see a bit of the original paint job underneath. We may take a few of these little screws and things and just dirty them up a little bit. Maybe put a little bit more there. Okay. And then once you're satisfied with the front here, we'll then move on to the side. So I'll just start working my way around, and we may need to reload our palette here. And here we're going to be a little heavier because this is just going to be kind of a messy, rusty sprocket wheel. And what I tend to do here, I'll even rotate my brush a little bit as I go, so that way we don't get like the same pattern over and over. Kind of randomize it a little bit just by rotating the brush a little bit. And you can also kind of hit the little sides here, maybe even brush a little bit on the top here, like especially where it's really messy. Kind of brush a little extra on, kind of tap it down to get rid of those paint strokes. Because the fewer paint strokes we have, the more realistic it'll look. And the other nice thing is you'll notice that the paint is kind of pooled up here as we kind of speckle it on. And that actually, once it dries, will add a little bit extra texture to our already textured prop. So we'll just work our way around. I need to reload my palette here, but we'll see. All right, once we get to the end here, we'll just kind of hit it here. You'll notice we still have kind of this rough under texture here, and that'll actually show through when we put our brown on. So we'll let that dry for about 5 minutes or so, and then we'll apply our next layer of paint. All right, so the next step here, we're going to take our real brown, or any normal kind of flat brown you can find, and we'll just shake it up here. You should always shake your acrylics. And then put that on our palette. A little bit more than I think I need. It's a little hard to judge on these larger parts. Oops, it's messy. Okay, so now we'll just load up here on our brown. And I like to start kind of where it's going to be messiest, since I have the most paint on my brush here. So I'm just going to go right into this recess. I'm just going to shove the paint right into these little crevices where I think it's going to be heaviest. And it's not very apparent yet, but when we get to the areas where it's a bit more speckled on with the white paint, you'll start to see that the patterns are showing up here through the brown. And what I like to do with this is I like to bring it right up to the edge of where the white is, but don't completely overlap it, because you want it to almost look slightly corrosive, and it has kind of that white hint. We don't want to completely eliminate our white layer. And here, just like before, we're going to kind of go up and over, kind of simulate, just kind of come up and over the logo a little bit. And while it's still a little wet here, I'm just going to go in just like before. I'm going to take my finger here, just dip it in a little bit of water. We're just going to gently rub it. Don't want to rub off all the paint, just the raised edges. There we go. And then we'll just kind of keep going around here. Basically, anywhere where we put the white, we want to put our brown. And it'll give it kind of, as it starts to dry, you'll notice it kind of gets almost this kind of rusty tint. Anywhere I see brush strokes, I try to pat them out just to kind of even it out. And it's okay if a little bit of the white, if we leave a little bit of white showing here, because we want it to look a little uneven. But yeah, we'll just bring it right up to the edge here so we still see a little hint of that white. And where it's a little speckled, I may even just take here and kind of go over, especially where the bolts and things are. Maybe even a little bit over the logo, just to make it a little dirty. Put it up again here, and then once again, we'll just go into kind of the deepest part here. Kind of work our way around here. And this is one too where sometimes I'll even go past where the white is, just because the dirt kind of goes everywhere on this thing. Gives it a bit more of a rusty look. Same thing, anywhere I see where the paint's looking a little kind of like almost like a flat edge, I try to pat it out and kind of feather it out a little bit. So we'll kind of leave that like that, and then I'll load up a little bit more paint. We'll just kind of tap it on here, and then kind of feather it out very lightly, tapping as we kind of get to the edges here, so that it doesn't completely, we want to eliminate those lines and things, but we just want to be careful not to completely erase. Work our way towards the edges here. And then the little spots where I intentionally left some gray, I'm trying to avoid those just because I like when a little bit of the original paint kind of comes through. Makes it look like this is just a worn wheel, something where the rust and the corrosion is kind of built up around the original kind of gray and black paint scheme. So, because he's supposed to have been sitting around for a couple hundred years. So So just lightly kind of speckle here, especially where it's just sort of a flat white here. Gives it kind of a, same thing, we're just sort of rotating the brush as we go so that they don't look completely like the same brush patterns. And then anywhere I see where I was really heavy-handed with the white, where I thought this was maybe going to be a darker one, I may even go in and just sort of brush on. And this kind of evens it out, almost makes it kind of like a brushed metal look slightly, and it just sort of adds to the rusted effect a little bit when we kind of flare it out and then hit some of these open areas so that there's not too much gray on the sides. I may even kind of do like a little bit of a edge highlight here. Kind of just work our way around. Basically just anywhere I see where I put some white before, I just try to apply it here. I'm just looking for those kind of heavy spots. Kind of hitting it from the side a little bit. Okay, so now that we've finished the front here, we'll go back to the side here. And once again, we're just going to start working our way around. And here I may be a little more generous with the brown, because as you see, even if we go completely over the white, it still kind of shows through the brown a little bit. And I'll still kind of use it a little bit as a template, but not being I'm being a little bit more generous here, just because we want to add a bit more color to this. But it still gives us a nice layered technique. So it doesn't just look like one single layer of paint. It looks like we have like multiple layers of buildup and dirt. And the same thing, we're just patting this on. We're not really brushing it on, because I just want to avoid, I try to, with this kind of stuff, the only time I really try to brushing it on is when I've used up a lot of the paint, so I get more of a, it's almost like a dry brush technique. It comes on very soft. Or if I wanted to take an area like something like this here, if I took like a big glob, I can kind of pat it out. In areas like this where there's a lot, kind of almost like a void here, this is where I may just lightly brush to kind of create that almost kind of grimy look. And then here, to make sure I don't get any lines, just kind of pat our paint here. So it doesn't look too hand painted. And here we have kind of this big gouge. I may try and add a little bit more paint here. Anywhere where I missed with the white, I may try and go over with a bit of the brown. You'll see we're still seeing a lot of those kind of dark areas where I missed with the white, and it kind of comes through as a pattern here on the brown. Oops, hit the sides here. All right. I kind of look at the top here. I see this is kind of where it's dirtiest. And yeah, I think I'm satisfied with that. So once again, we'll let that sit and dry, and then we'll kind of move on to our next stage. All right, so for our final stage of acrylics, we're going to use our burnt umber. This is another cheap 50-cent paint we got at Walmart. You can use any burnt umber style paint you can get your hands on. I just like this because it's cheap. You can kind of get it in a big quantity. And so here I'll just load up here, and you might look at this and you might say, this actually looks pretty done. Why are we adding more paint to this? Well, if you ever look at like a drawing of like Wally's, like a concept drawing, it actually gets really dark in these areas. And what this will do is this is just going to add that extra little bit of darkness. And once again, we're not going to try and cover the whole thing in this stuff. We're just going to bring it right up to the edges, because we still want all of our hard work to be visible. So I'm just going to start here in like our darkest section. And you'll notice this is considerably darker than our last brown that we were using. It has almost a tint of like red or orange in it. And here we're just going to bring it right up to the edge, almost to the edge of like the brown and the white there. So we get kind of that gradient. And same thing here, you see these little brush marks that I accidentally made. I'm just going to pat those out. Don't be too worried if you get little inconsistencies, because this is supposed to look messy and dirty. And as it dries, you'll actually see a bit more of the previous layers kind of come through. And we'll just kind of work it up over the edges here, especially where we've decided it's going to be really filthy dirty, like in these areas here. And this is a slightly different one than the one we were working on earlier, so you'll notice I don't have that big messy bit in the center here. This one was already dry and ready to go, so we just moved on to this one. And yeah, we're just following that roadmap that we created for ourselves here, and we're just kind of going around, picking out our darkest, grimiest bits, and just sort of starting in those areas and working our way gently towards the edges here. And I could try to go around some of these bolts here even and try to dirty them up a little bit. Yeah, just slowly make our way around here. Make sure we don't miss any sharp edges here, or like I said, these inside areas tend to be the darkest part of the wheel. So we want to make sure that's where all the rust and everything is kind of collected. And you'll see it looks really grimy. But our previous layers are giving it that extra little bit of texture. So it's not all wasted. Yeah, we're just going to slowly work our way around these little areas and just make sure we use a very light touch when we get to these edges, because we still want brown and our whites or beige to kind of pull through. And some of these bolts, I'll even leave a little bit of the white because I kind of like how that looks. We'll go back in here, this little recess. Just put as much paint as we can in those, and then just slowly work out towards these edges. Really grime them up here. Once again, we're just rotating our brush as we pat this in so that it doesn't look entirely like the same pattern. I even rotate this a little bit so I can see it a little bit better. And same for you guys. Here we go. Go around this edge here. Go back down in here. Just slowly work towards that edge. And then as we get close to it, we just want to put a little less pressure so it looks a little bit more stippled. There we go. Put that right in here. There we go. Kind of bring it up over the edge here. This is a great example of where I didn't get total coverage, but I'm actually going to leave it because I kind of like the way it shows through there. And if I see any edges where I think it looks a little too straight or sharp, I just kind of pat it down so it looks a little more randomized. And we'll just keep doing this until we're satisfied with our end result. A little lighter here because this is one where we decided not to put as much paint to expose some of that original paint. We'll just kind of work our way around here. And then same as before, if I want to add a little bit extra effect, I can kind of just lightly, with the lightest pressure, just add some of our paint here to the side. And you'll see it kind of darkens up, and try to maybe even pat it into those little grooves and things. Okay. And then if I see any other spots, like maybe right here, just a little extra. But for the most part, I think that actually looks pretty good. So now, just like before, we'll move on to the side here. And we'll just work our way around here. Here I try to be, like, some spots are going to be a little heavier than others, but I try to just randomize it and spread it out so that certain areas are a little darker, but I still want a little bit of our previous work to show through. here we have that gouge again. This was consistent on all of the castings we made, so I may just darken that up a little bit. I can even add some wash later. Okay. And we're just rotating our brush, make sure we don't have the same brush stroke every time. And as we go, we'll notice it gets a little lighter, and that's okay, because we can always go back and darken certain areas up if we have to. If you have a little extra on your brush, you can kind of roll it on and then just pat it out, kind of feather it out. All right, almost done. Okay. I may just get some little corners here. Just work around and basically just, if you see anything you don't like, just modify it. But yeah, I'd say that's done for this layer here. And so then you could let this dry for a little bit as well. And then we'll go ahead and add in our final layer, which is our black wash. All right, and so now we're going to move on to the final stage, which is we're going to apply a black wash. The wash I'm using today is this one by Army Painter. It's the Quick Shade Dark Tone, but you can use any black wash, like the Citadel, any of that. You could even take some black acrylic paint, just water it down. And so I'll just put a few little drops here in my little palette here. And now we're going to switch over to our detail brush. And I'm just going to dip this in, pretty loaded up pretty heavy, and then I'm just going to dip up just a little bit. So it's loaded up like that. I'm going to start here with our bolts here. I'm just going to find like this one here, just dip it in. And what's great about this stuff is it just immediately sucks into the little recesses, the little cracks and things. And you can just load it up and it immediately darkens whatever it touches. And when it dries, it'll actually be kind of almost like a stain, but it's great for these little recesses. So with all the bolts, I tend to just really dirty them up in here. Just drop whole little drops in there. Same with this little guy here. Just load them up. Should put a little bit more in there. There we go. See, I'll just put a little drop in each one of these. Which gives it kind of a nice little dark, so that way there's no little gray primer or anything poking out from under these things. There we go. And then I'm using a reference photo here and kind of just following. You'll see here these little black stains and things in the concept art. And so I'm trying to replicate some of those. So I may go into this top corner here and kind of just following kind of this little guide here. It doesn't have to be perfect, just kind of darkening up little areas, maybe darken up this little back area here. And I think there's a little drop somewhere up here, kind of just be heavy-handed with this one here. Kind of just go right over the top of the logo. That'll just stain the top there. And you may even go into some of these recessed areas. You want it to look a little darker, just drop some of this stuff in. If you want to spread it out a little bit, you can kind of do that too. This stuff's great because it's kind of watery and it'll just add that extra shade of darkness to whatever you paint this on. And this is great if you're ever working with like weapons or anything like that too. This is a great thing to apply as kind of almost like a metallic wash. Something that just looks dirty and used. Here I'll be a little more dirty with it, just kind of move the brush around a little bit. And then let's see if there are any other areas I want to darken. Maybe I'll make this area just a little darker. Maybe bring it up a little bit here, kind of bring it on the back. Okay, and maybe just a little drop, just right above this bolt here. Yeah, and then this bolt, I think it could use just a little bit more wash. Maybe work a little around it. And if you see any little areas where you think dirt and grime and would collect. This is a great time to just kind of apply it, especially these little areas, these little bumps and things. And I'm going to drop a little bit right here too. And another place where you could really add this in is on the sides, kind of in this little corner here where the top part meets the side. So what I like to do is I'll just take a generous portion here and I'll just sort of rotate this, kind of just work it around, and I'm looking where it's heaviest, and then when I get to these areas I kind of lighten up a little bit, and by this point most of the wash has kind of come off the brush. We're getting one of those darker areas again, so I'll kind of get into the center of it, kind of work my way out towards the lighter sections. And this is one where you can actually be a little generous, because the more it pulls up, the more of that kind of stained black greasy effect you'll get. Maybe I'll add a little bit here. Maybe even pull it up a little bit. Usually with this stuff you don't want it to pool if you're doing like miniatures or model making, but with this we want it to look a little dirty. So I may take a really generous portion here and just dip it into these little corners, kind of have it kind of run out a little bit, like so. Yeah, and with that, I think we'll call this one done. Maybe just a little bit over this. But yeah, you can do this all day, but yeah, I think we'll call that finished. But yeah, definitely let us know if you have any questions. Feel free to comment or send us messages. But yeah, thanks for watching.